Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited for tonight's presentation. There's going to be a lot of information, and I'm sure we'll have a whole host of questions, and we will work very diligently to make sure we answer all of your questions as quickly as possible. First, I want to introduce the team. I know that we've had many opportunities to meet, but figured why, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Vivian Verbedian. I'm from Hill International, and I'm the owner's project manager for this project. Along with me is Paul Callis from Hill International. He is also working alongside with me on this very special project. From the LBA team, which is your architectural team, we have Lee Sherwood, who is the principal in charge, David Harris as the project manager, and Ann Ketterer, who is the community facilitator. You've heard from each of these on numerous other presentations, and you will do so again tonight. First and foremost, let's take a look at our schedule. So as of today, we have worked very much to put together a presentation that in turn, this presentation and other documentation will be incorporated into a submission to the MSBA. The MSBA, as we've stated earlier, is the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they are the governing body for a lot of these public projects. And with that, we are also, Swampscott has participated in the MSBA grant program to provide assistance and funding for the new elementary school. They do have certain requirements, and one of which is our submission of the preliminary design program to be made in July. All of the meetings, presentations, and work we have been doing thus far is in anticipation and leading up to the July submission, and further later into the October submission, where we will have the preferred schematic report submitted. Hopefully, this town will vote in September and it will be favorable, and we can move forward into designing our new project.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. So we like to start all of these community forums by getting an understanding of everything that we've learned and discovered so far. So as many of you remember, in January, we hosted our first community workshop where we talked about goals and sort of your hopes and dreams. And so maybe some of you attending tonight recall that forum. Maybe some of you came and participated, and we asked you, what are your hopes and dreams? What do you want for this new project? Whatever shape and size it is, what do you really want to get out of it? And what we got is all this information in front of you. And we were able to take those goals and distill them into 4 really important categories. The first one is education. The second one is site and traffic. The next one is sustainability. And the last one is community. So David, if you go to the next slide, the importance of these goals is this is a way for the design team to test all of the design options, to put them all through the filter of each of these goals to make sure that this building will be and live up to all of your expectations. So here we have a diagram showing the 7 options, and you can see right there off the bat that when we put them through the filter, through the lens of all 4 goals, 2 of the options in fact dropped off because they didn't meet these very high standards set by you, the community. So as we go through this process, we're always reminded that we check every decision that we make through the lens of education, traffic, sustainability, and community. David, if you just please go to the next one. And this process is not over. Thank you so much for attending tonight, but I want you to take note of the upcoming workshops. So our next one will be June 30th, where we talk about the project, give you an overview of everything that we've done to date. The next one after that is in August. It is to review the design options. This is so important, actually, that we're having 2 sessions. So the first one is August 25th, and the second one is September 8th. Again, that's to review the design options. And then from there, at the end of September, on September 22nd, what we're going to do is we're going to share with you the preferred design option review. So please, please, if you can, come to all of those community meetings because your input is paramount to this process. David, yeah, thank you. So the first goal is education. And you'll remember, you've probably seen this slide before, you'll remember that the MSBA gave Swampscott 4 distinct different enrollment options. The first one was a district-wide K through 4, so that's sort of the big option. The next one was a district-wide grades 3 through 5, that's sort of the medium option. There was a second medium option, which was a K through 5, so new school, but for only half the town. You'll notice in this diagram, it's grayed out. The reason this enrollment option is grayed out is because this option does not meet the goal or the standard for education in equity. It's not equitable to build a brand new facility for only half the town. So it was decided that doesn't meet our standards. And then the last enrollment option is the small option, which is to renovate or rebuild Hadley. So if you go to the next slide, David. Great. So within education, we have our own distinct goals. And I just wanted to review those really quickly with you tonight. And I want you to keep them in the back of your mind when Lee talks about all the design options that we share with you. So the first one is district grade-based alignment. And what this really means is it's a goal of the school district to have all the students in the same grade under one roof. And the benefit to that is that they have all the same personnel, the same support, and the same resources. The next one is to improve student placement. There is a notion, and it is somewhat true, that neighborhood schools is what Swampscott has. And for many students, that's true. They do attend the school in their neighborhood. They're zoned for Hadley, they go to Hadley. But for many other students, that is not the case. Currently, with the 3 schools, some of the resources are spread out amongst them. For example, if you are living in, say, Stanley, the Stanley zone, but your child has a certain special education need, it's very possible that your child will not necessarily go to Stanley, but to one of the other schools because the need for your child is not located at Stanley. So even though you have neighborhood schools, that does not apply to the entire town. And the next one is small school feel. You know, we have heard this at basically every workshop that we've had. And so as your architect, we take that incredibly importantly. So we're going to design a school, regardless if it's the big option or the small option or the medium option. We'll design you a school that has a small school feel. And why is that important? That's important because we want to make sure that all of our young learners, and this is an elementary school, so we're talking about young learners, are able to connect with their teachers. And we find that creating small neighborhoods within that school does that. So the next one is class sizes in primary grades. Right now, your kindergarten and first grade have 7 sections. It's a goal of this school district to increase that to 9 sections. By increasing it to 9 sections, we actually reduce the size of the classroom, which means your children have more one-on-one with their teacher. It's just a different ratio. It's preferred for that kind of young learning. And the last one is to improve scheduling and minimize travel time. With the way your setup is right now, resources are not shared under one roof. So what that means is students, teachers, personnel have to go from building to another. And it's a goal to take all resources and put them under one roof, which becomes more efficient. And another part of this goal is to be able to cluster classes by grade so that the resources that are allocated or associated with that grade are also available right there to all of those students, so it becomes more efficient. So these are just things to keep in mind as we start to look at floor plans and locations.
Okay, thank you, Ann. Just to recap on sites, most will recall that we cast a very wide net looking at potential sites in town. And we came away after doing a lot of due diligence with 5 sites that we even took a harder look at. And again, looking at the different criteria and how the sites matched up against the project goals, we reached the conclusion that the Phillips Park site and the DBW site were no longer viable candidates. So we struck them off the list and focused on the remaining site locations being the Hadley, Stanley, and middle school sites. And traffic was a very important, critical aspect, really, of looking at all those various sites to see how they measured up on how we could improve the traffic and accommodate the traffic load for the anticipated new project. And again, looking at Phillips and DPW and looking and comparing them against the 6 criteria that we established for traffic and safety. Again, those sites did not measure up at all. And the remaining sites, we can incorporate improvements as necessary to support a project at those remaining sites. And sustainability goals, as we discussed at our last public meeting, we got some great feedback from the community, and we really feel like we understand the priorities in town as it relates to sustainability. And energy efficiency was certainly a top category and goal, where we will be targeting a very aggressive EUI, a low energy usage intensity, and we'll be pursuing net zero ready building systems, as well as pursuing through the MSBA formal LEED or CHIPS certification, which actually provides us with additional MSBA reimbursement funds. And we'll also be taking advantage of the commissioning services that the MSBA offers for all of their public school projects. We are also keeping very much in mind the fact that our solutions and building system specifications need to be practical. They need to be easily maintained and operated. They need to be proven technology so that we get real world benefits from these systems. So we do get that long lifespan and an excellent payback on the initial investments. And sustainability is not just about energy, it's also about health, wellness, and indoor environmental quality. So we'll be very careful in some of the materials that we're specifying. We'll pay attention to acoustics, very important criteria when it comes to an educational environment. And again, looking towards reducing the maintenance burden on the town maintenance staff and budget. And finally, the school itself is an excellent opportunity to become a teaching tool, not just for the students, but really, frankly, for the whole community. And we'll work with the educators to see how we can make mutually supportive connections to the curriculum, and really go so far as to integrate recycling into sort of the everyday life of the school, to again really keep that idea of stewardship alive and well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who is going to go through the conceptual design options.
Hi, everybody. I think it's really important to note that good designs don't fall from the sky. And if you just see them one time and you don't know the background of it, that's really not fair to anyone. So all the things that you just heard were part of our process for learning which sites were best, which options were best. And even tonight, when we have the honor of showing you some of the floor plans and some of the ideas that we're starting to generate, it isn't done. This is a consensus built option and process, and we just wanted you to know that we're working with you. Next. During the visioning process for education, we came up with a number of guiding principles. Now, these guiding principles came up in every different aspect when we spoke with the community, when we spoke to even the teachers. And it is our hope that all of these themes express themselves in the designs that you're about to see. For example, we hope that each of these options shows how to design in terms of equity, how to make a building or a school that's inclusive to all learners. We have really high expectations for the kind of spaces we create. The 21st century design for schools is all about collaboration and creating places for innovation. And we want to create an inspiring place for teaching and for learning. And then these spaces also should be flexible and adaptable. What good is it to build a building today that in 20 years is not usable? We need to make a building that is very flexible and can adapt to future learning. So in 20 years, a new faculty member may come in and go, this works perfectly for what I'm doing today. Community is a huge part of the equation here in Swampscott. We want whatever building we create to be a beacon and something to be proud of for your whole community. Someone mentioned the idea of the community as being, you know, the school as being the heart of the community. And whatever we build should be able to be used by all, not just the students and the families, but by everyone. So we've put a lot of thought into that. We've also put a lot of thought into efficiency, which equals square footage and really money, and sustainability, which means that we're creating a building that lasts for a really long time. That includes energy costs. So we want this to be an energy efficient building. And the most sustainable thing you can do is build something durable. And that's what we would like to create for you. And once again, we hear the mantra of small school feel. And we believe, from the students to the faculty, to all of you who we've listened to so far, that you really value the small school experience and what it feels like to be in learning communities. And that's really important for young children while they pursue their social, emotional growth, that they are in safe places to be where they know everyone around them. And lastly, you have a lot of great places. Some of these sites really provide access to different connections outdoors. For example, Hadley to the park and the ocean, and then Stanley and the middle school site to nature. And we want to really, really understand that and how that relates to town history. Next. So here's where we take a deep breath and kind of get into this idea of how to look at multiple options and get into this rhythm of what we're looking at. This is the Hadley School site from a satellite. And as you can see, it's not a huge site, it's an urban site, and you can see the existing buildings there on the site. We show this to you so that you can get oriented and say, this is one of the sites we're looking at. We're going to show you 3 options that fit on this site in different ways. Okay, next. So the way we've done this is try to be really objective and say, well, how do we really start with just kind of a renovation and all the way to new and different sizes and all of that? Option 1, as you can see right here, and this is a slide from earlier in our evaluations where we looked at all of the different traffic and site options, was the idea of keeping the old school, maybe not the addition to the old school, but the old school, and then adding a like addition to it, new, that brought it up to the program that was necessary through the MSBA and for your education. And so we put together this diagram, and as you can see, it actually takes up quite a bit of the site, because the program, in the very beginning, someone asked, why can't we just renovate the existing Hadley? Well, it turns out that the program from the MSBA and what is required for a K through 4 school of this size for 390 students is almost twice as big as the existing Hadley school is. And that's because the existing Hadley has small rooms. It really doesn't even have a gymnasium. It has kind of a place in the basement. It really doesn't have the education spaces that it needs. It might have 50 years ago, but things have really changed, and especially special education and all these other opportunities. So it grows a lot. On the right, you can see many of the grades that we kind of gave, or the that we gave to these different options at the time. For example, for educational spaces, an existing building has difficulty providing the right size spaces in the right places. And this had a minus for district equity because it's just the Hadley School. So if you build this, it means that Stanley and Clark are untouched. And so you may have kids going to very different levels of, you know, and getting very different levels of teaching and spaces. It's a wonderful location though, down at Stanley, great location for walkers, and even the traffic and the access can be really, really helped by possibly making Reddington a one-way street and allowing the queuing to, you know, for cars. So it has a lot of good characteristics. Next. So what we've done here, if you take your mind and you turn this a little bit, you can see Reddington Street along the bottom, and you can see a floor plan, and then you can see Limsdott Park above that. So I hope you all can see where you are right now. The ocean in this drawing is to your left. You can see a little sliver of the ocean there on the side. If I look out that way, I start to see Boston. This is the first attempt to take these programs that we put together. Program means the spaces, and there's a whole list of square footages and all the different spaces, and the site and all that evaluation, and put them together into what you would know as floor plans that are multi-level and make sense. Keep in mind that all through this process, we had spoken with the faculty and did an analysis of what spaces should be next to each other and how they wanted to group spaces and what kinds of things they want to do for education. And we tried to incorporate this in all of these designs. Looking at this drawing, on the left, there's a renovated building. You see that kind of formal building that says cafe. Cafe means cafetorium. There's a kitchen and things like that. That's the old building there that we're trying to keep in this design. To the right of that, it says addition, and you can see that there's a building that's attached to it. You can see it's just as big as the existing building because of all the programs that are needed. This building is 3 stories tall, and it's about the same height as the existing. I wanted to also point out for our edification as we move forward that we've color coded these. When you say on the right, when it has a blue, a light blue, I hope no one out there is colorblind, but there's a light blue, and that will always mean academic, like classrooms or special education and all of that. The purple designates shared spaces, spaces that everyone uses and even the community. And then red designates here just admin and entry services. So when you see on the right, it says K, that stands for kindergarten. So here's a new building next to the old building. We put the kindergarten on the first floor so they can access the play area. Next. On each of these options, we're going to then go up through the building. So that was the main level. Now we walk up to the second level, and you can see on the left, you have the existing building. We're actually looking down into the cafeteria because it's 2 stories tall, but there's a media center and art, and they're all shared. Now the new building, you get to see this whole cluster of 1st grade classrooms and 2nd grade classrooms with these wonderful flex areas and breakout spaces and STEM rooms and things like that are all part of the program. Next. As we rise up to the 3rd level, and again, it's our job here to connect it physically to the existing building. You get to see more special education classrooms, which hopefully, you know, start to work back and forth with the 4th grade and the 3rd grade. We have resource rooms and all kinds of things. So this is, and so on this particular plan, that's how we would propose in general to have a renovation and addition next to each other. I want to go to one more plan here. Next. This is a very specific, so what we just did, we were way up in the air and now we went underground. And we did this because Only for the renovation addition scheme is there a substantial basement. On the left, you see a renovated basement of the existing school. The unfortunate thing is that because it's underground and there's not that many windows and the ceiling heights are so low, it's not a great place to put classrooms or anything like that. Is it wasted space? Not necessarily, but it's not program space. So this building is bigger than if we were just to build it new. The other thing is we put the very large gymnasium that is programmed, 6,000 square feet, we put it underground. This is a location where we've done some testing and we think that you can go down. But to have a 2-story gymnasium underground is a feat. I mean, it can be done, but you know what I mean. And if we tried to bring it above grade, we would probably take up the whole site then, and there wouldn't be much room for play. So you can see that every option and every approach that we take has its pros and cons. So you get, this is how we look at each one of these. Next. Option 2 was the idea of doing the same thing, the same program as the last one we looked at, which is just a Hadley K-4 building. So Stanley and Clark remain the way that they are, but it's to build an all-new building. There are probably benefits to this because, well, for one thing, if you look on the right, educational spaces are easier to deal with because we can put the right size spaces next to the spaces that they really want to be next to. We can organize it perfectly for the configuration that helps the, because we're building it all new. District equity is still kind of low because it's one of 3 schools and obviously they would have resources here that the other schools would not. Location is still great in all of those. Next. So once again, let's orient. Reddington Street's on the bottom, Linscott Park's above us. What we're trying to do here is have everyone come in down from the right side down Reddington and then pull off street and have a long drop off so that the entry could be way to the left. And that allows more and more queuing and gets people off the road. That's a very important concept for traffic, and we've really listened to our traffic consultant. In this particular case, there would be a school and it has 2 wings and it has a center. And in the center, which is purple, for the most part, are the shared spaces like the cafeteria, and you're going to see that the gymnasium is actually above it in this case. What's wonderful about that is if you came in, see the red arrow takes you in, it's very safe, there's one entrance. There's a lobby and everybody can use that cafeteria. As a matter of fact, there's the concept that you could open up that cafetorium to the back, which would open to Linscott Park, and then the community at certain events could use the cafetorium and the kitchen and things like that as part of events. We want this building to become part of the community. Then on either side, you have the wings, which are usually academic spaces. In this case, we have kindergarten, the Ks, right on the ground floor, so they can get right to the play. Next. As we go up through the building, on the second floor plan, you're looking down into the cafetorium in the middle. But then we start to have our little clusters once again of grades. For example, on the right, you see the 4 first grade classrooms, and they're around a flex space for shared and for STEM and for other things like that, and breakout spaces. And so they all kind of use these collaboration spaces and go back and forth. These classrooms are a lot larger than most of the classrooms in the existing Hadley School. And that's the right size for classrooms, not just for the MSBA, but in order to have a flexible classroom, which all of your learners and teachers will want in order to provide different ways of teaching, they need to be a certain size. On the left, you see the second grade. So what we're doing here is we're really creating these little worlds, these little neighborhoods for, say, the 80 or 90 kids that are in those little areas and teachers there. But then they can all come into the middle. Let's go up a floor. They can always all come into the middle and share those spaces. So that you can see the gymnasium is quite large, and that's the size that it really wants to be in order to provide both multi-purpose space, but also the physical education. We brought it up in this idea up above so that it could not be on the first floor and kind of block everything. We wanted it to be very open on the first floor. If you are a visitor though, you could come in, those two wings on the sides where the kids are, those could all be closed off on the nights and the weekends. So the whole center is just your community center and it can be used all the time. Next. So that's an example of what a new Hadley School could look like. Let's jump to the next, the final scheme for Hadley site, which is option 3. As you remember from the enrollment option, there was an idea of doing a district-wide 3 through 5. That meets many of the district equity and educational goals of bringing all of the people from one grade and all the kids and teachers into one place. So it really has about the same footprint, and the educational spaces and the work really well. Next. So in just a floor plan sense, it's very similar. It has a very similar idea here as does the other one, but many of the spaces are bigger. There's more kids in this. The Hadley School that we looked at had 390 kids. This would have 540 children in it. And so some of this, actually it's a 4-story building instead of a 3-story building. You enter in the same sort of way. There's a lobby. The admin is right in the center. There's a larger cafeteria and stage. The kitchen still works really well. And then there are 2 wings. Now, I want to explain why we took what could be a straight building and just took those 2 wings and angled them. First of all, this is a street. So when you're walking or driving along this street, if you look at the entry side, by bending or turning those wings, you kind of create a courtyard or a place out front. It's a tight site, but we can start to make it feel like it has some protection. When you splay the wings like that and the cafe's in the middle, it also opens up to the park. So you imagine coming in and then it all opens up to the park, because the park is really an amazing place and a place that we really want to visually focus on. You can imagine the cafeteria being all glass in the back and being part of that wonderful place. There's a couple other things though. Let's go to the next floor and I'll go into that. If you look down in the right-hand corner, you're going to see what's called a north arrow. It's basically telling you where the sun is and where north is. That means, so if you look at north and it's pointing a certain direction, which is coming from the ocean and off to the side, that north is where the sun is kind of pointing from. So it's kind of coming in on the angle. By angling those walls, we actually turn those 3rd grade classrooms into the sun for better solar harvesting of light. And that's a really big deal when we start talking about sustainability, saving energy, bringing light in the right places. What we really want on any of these buildings is to really stress for classrooms, south light and north light. East is okay sometimes, it's in the morning and it's not too harsh. But the west light, which is actually in this case coming more from the Linscott's Park side, luckily we have a lot of big trees, is very harsh and creates a lot of glare and a lot of heat gain. So any place we put these buildings, we're going to be very aware of where the sun is, and that's one of the reasons why we did this. I also want to point out how you see the media center. If you go to the next floor, it's a 2-story media center, so it's this wonderful glass bay that's right on the street. So imagine walking down the street, seeing the wings, and you see the media center. Oftentimes we think of the media center as the heart of learning. It's kind of like I don't want to mix metaphors, but it's the brain. And a lot of people like to see that up front and right in the center, and that's what we've done in this scheme. Next. And lastly, this is a 4-story building because what we do is we have the first level, which is kind of community. Second level is all 3rd grade, but it's broken into 2 pieces. 4th grade is on the next level, and this is the 4th level. It has the whole 5th grade. On one side, there's 4 classrooms. On the other, there's 3. That's all 7 classes. And it really breaks down the scale, and the kids have wonderful views and all of that. That's how we try to design a building that fits its context, that does the internal things in organization, but is also fairly efficient, usable by the community, and in urban context. Thank you. Next. Now we're not done. That last scheme that we just looked at, that option 3, was a 3 through 5 option for 540 students. Now we're looking at that same option on the middle school site. It's kind of the medium size. We were told by the traffic engineer that really doing a 900 student school next to the middle school was not going to be a successful idea for traffic and for access. But she did feel like the middle-sized school could work if we do the right things. Next. So on this drawing, if you know the site, up in the, see in the bottom, there's the middle school and the road going into it. Where we're showing a school down in the corner in this diagram is where the tennis courts are. So there's a little black dotted line, and that's where the tennis courts are right now. It's already developed, it's the flat space. And right to the side of that, where it says fields, is really where there's a Little League field, and then the other fields. What we're trying to do in this diagram is show the idea of creating a secondary access road off of Mason Road, coming down and around of the field and wetlands there, and having its own drop off for a new 3 through 5 school. And in this case, we show it as a 4-story school because it's almost identical in its size and scale to the one that we put at Hadley just a few minutes ago. And you're looking down into it, so having a taller school didn't seem like it was that foreign. And also, once again, that allows us to put 1 grade on every floor above the first, you know, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And that was a really nice diagram. So that's where we went with this. We were trying to save space. One thing to remember throughout all this is the lower you go, if I have a 1-story building or a 2-story building, it's going to take up a lot more land. So if I have a tight site like the Hadley site, and this is actually tight because we only have so many fields, then you probably want to build up as much as you can without creating a problem with scale or fit within the neighborhood. And we would be very careful with that. Next. So here's a floor plan on the middle school site that is very similar to the Hadley one we just looked at. The only difference is we kind of straighten it out and elongate it a little bit because we can, and it's not on that little tight Hadley site. What's interesting about this building is the south side is the front and the north side is the back side. So it's very well oriented to the solar arc. You would come in, there'd be the cafeteria in the middle, and then support spaces. And as you go upstairs, you would have the wonderful clusters. This is all 3rd grade on this floor. On one side, you'd have a small cluster of students, and the other side, another, what we would call neighborhoods. And they have shared spaces and all the kinds of things that would make it really, really easy for them. In any of these designs, say if I was in 3rd grade on one side, if I wanted to go out to the playground, we would just go down that stair on the bottom, on the end of each hallway, and pop right out and go to the play areas without walking through other people's areas. Next. So then we have the 4th grade floor, and next we have the 5th grade floor. And again, all through this, you'll see that we want to cluster the kids create these learning areas, and have the shared spaces in the center. So we can talk a lot about the middle school site. I think a little later we're going to go through our evaluations a little bit, but this is really to show you the floor plans, and we can talk more about how the sites and the programs work together. Next. Our last site that made it through the gauntlet of evaluation was the Stanley site, which everybody knows about. And as you look down, you can see the Stanley School in purple. You can also see that the field, which is on the left side. And it's a fairly substantial site. One of the wonderful things about the Stanley site is the Charles Ewing Woods conservation land down at the bottom that the kids and the students and the teachers have been using for decades. Next. When we did a diagram and an analysis of this, it scored very well for educational spaces and equity, because this is the first time we're showing you a new school that is a district-wide K through 4, which is 900 students. That means that we're taking all the students K through 4 through all 3 schools, and we're putting them all in one place. But true to the district goals, we're actually making a lower and an upper school here to split it into different places. Think of it as a twin school. So in this diagram, on the top of the orange, you see it says lower school. That's a certain number of students, and it breaks down and it has a couple of floors, and it breaks down the population and the neighborhood. So that's a little place. It even has its own drop-off and entry and administration. On the lower side there, you see it says upper school 3 through 4. So we have those grades over there, and it has its own drop-off and own entrance. And then in the middle, again, true to our diagram that we've been repeating here, are all shared spaces, the cafeteriums, the gymnasiums, the media centers, things like that, so that the kids can be autonomous and have their own world. And we're going to show you floor plans and then come into the center. That was very important to us. Another thing I'd just like to bring up. If you look at this diagram, you see Orchard Road. Our traffic engineer showed in her presentations a lot of wonderful options for changing the circulation and for connecting sidewalks and making a better flow all the way through that whole area in that neighborhood and outward. Because there's going to be more cars, there's still a single access in this particular idea. But right now, all the kids, only the faculty park on site, and then all of the parents, they park on the road all over the area, and they walk their kids onto the site. There's no real drop-off on the site. Our idea and our goal with the traffic engineer is to bring people in onto the site and create a whole queuing lane for both of the drop-offs, hundreds of feet of queuing. This means that no longer are people parking out in the wilderness of and blocking traffic, but once they come along, they flow in and they are on site. We're going to take care of all those cars on site. And they come in and they drop off and they leave, or they come in, they loop around and they go to the other drop off and they leave. We are exploring we'd love to have another access or egress in different places, but we're still working on that. But our traffic engineer assures us that given the right amount of structural work on Orchard Street and its surroundings, that this could flow very nicely. Yes, you can also see there's room for wonderful play spaces around the back and for fields. Next. So I want us all to get oriented here. Whitman Road, which connects to Orchard, is up at the top. And that's where that diagram showed everyone coming in, and that's where everyone comes in right now. The existing Stanley School is right below. There's a dotted line, kind of where it says playfield right there, of the existing school. It's our goal, if we do this site, to build our school without touching the existing school. Obviously, there would be, you know, partitions and things like that, so that we don't need any kind of temporary classrooms or anything like that during the construction. After this is built, obviously, we will have no longer have need for Hadley, which could probably be sold or taken care of in any kind of way for the tax base. And then Stanley would become a playfield. Why did we take the building and turn it here? Once again, I'm going to point out our north arrow on the very right bottom side. North is coming in on a very specific angle, south, the south is. So we want our building and all of our classrooms at the top and the bottom to directly face south or directly face north. And in this case, we were able to do it. It also opens up to the two drop-offs. So you imagine over where you see the kindergarten and the lower school drop-off, which is the top building, it kind of turns and faces a whole courtyard area to the drop-off. When you come around the whole building and have the second drop-off for the upper school entry and courtyard, it opens up right there. So there's this kind of like wonderful interplay of space and opening and closing, and it kind of pulls it away from the residential buildings a little bit and creates more scale. And we're very interested in the idea of how a simple move can make a building much more flexible and adaptable. If I were to come in Whitman and be dropped off, I'd come into the lower school entry. I'd walk in and there would be a lower school lobby. That lobby could be closed off from the middle of the school and from the other school. So essentially, where it says all those kindergarten classrooms and those pieces, that is the lower school. That's its own place. And as we go up through, you're going to see shared spaces and all of that. In the middle, we have art and shared spaces in media and a wonderful cafetorium. This is the largest cafetorium. So you can imagine it facing out to the fields, and anybody who goes in there can go out. You can also imagine it as a theater because it's 2 stories high and has a stage. So you come in, it can be set up in all kinds of ways, and it has its own big kitchen. Any of these schools, we would love to have an actual working commercial kitchen that could service other buildings if need be. If I walk in kind of, this building is a bit of a yin-yang effect where you come in on one side and you slide in on the other side and you meet in the middle like that. So if you look at the bottom part, that's where we will have our upper school above. Next. So once again, you have a lower school on the top, and you can see now it's the 1st grade. Because the kindergarten rooms push out, there could be an outdoor learning spaces and deck there. Our goal on this project, or on this option, is to have primarily a 3-story school that steps. So where the kindergarten and others are, it's 1 story and steps up. The cafetorium, you'll see, is actually only a 2-story. So we're trying to do these things to break down the scale, but not take up too much of it. We're going to show you an option 7B that's actually 2 stories, and you can see how much bigger it gets. So we're very cognizant of that. So you go up through the building, and on the lower part, you'll see the wing. Once again, you'll see the 3rd grade, and that's the upper school wing. Once again, that can be closed off. Both of those wings can be closed off at nights and in evenings, and the whole middle becomes a community center. Because the spaces are larger and the gym is larger as well in order to handle those kids and be partitioned, these are actually quite important community spaces for sharing and for any kind of events. The media center, which you see right there in the center, think of that as a glass box or a fish. We love the idea of a fish tank. That actually came out of our educational visioning, the idea of an aquarium or something that goes up through the building, and the light is coming down through it and being shared to the center of the building. That way we can have different levels of media that's dispersed to different age of kids. Let's go to the next floor. So the third floor, and again, don't be too frightened of a 3-story elementary school. I live in Lexington, and all of our, right now, for example, all of our elementary schools seem to be 3 stories right now. And because as you get older, you put the older kids up a little bit higher and the younger kids are down low. And it seems like you only go up a couple of flights of stairs. And also, it doesn't go too far in being different than the scale of all the buildings around it. This particular site is well buffered by trees and can be designed in different ways for it to fit. And again, I was talking to you about having 1-story portions, 2-story portions, and others that step. So the 3rd level floor plan, you see you're at the upper level for the 2nd grade and the 4th grade, so the biggest kids are on the top. And then there's actually a couple of little decks, and there's a terrace over the entire, on the right, where it's orange. That is a roof terrace that is over the entire cafetorium. So up there, 2 stories, looking out over the fields, and obviously you can see the woods and things like that, is a learning terrace. And right next to it is a media, but probably maker spaces and things like that. A wonderful way to create more space on a site that already has some wonderful play areas, very wonderful patios and other areas to be. So in your mind, I want you to remember how big that is. Next. So what just happened? Well, what we just did was we created another school that's very similar, but it's only 2 stories rather than 3 stories. So you can see that it's pushing way up at the top. It's pushing towards the drop off. It pushes, the play field gets very skinny. It pushes down. In other words, 2 stories has a much bigger footprint. So you imagine that would be the case, right? Why did we draw it? Because we feel like it's really important for us to show you a 3 and a 2-story scheme on this site, a 7A and a 7B. So as we go forward, we can show you some 3-dimensional sketches and things so you can really understand what the trade-off is between having something lower and having something that's big on the site, has a big footprint. I think you'll find that there are clever ways to do all of this. So this is a much bigger footprint for a school, although it's really apportioned exactly the same as the last one that we looked at. Next. And we only have 2 levels here. So you can see that the 1st grade or the lower school is on the top, but then we have the, on the bottom, you have your kind of upper school. And in this case, you see that you really, because it's only 2 stories, you have all the 3s and all the 4th grade classrooms kind of on the same wing. So they come in, they split. It doesn't break down into those smaller pieces. It breaks down by grade, but it doesn't break down as much as the last floor plan that took everybody into different kind of half grade sizes. I think it's a legitimate thing to look at, a legitimate approach, but we want you to know that we're objective, that we're interested in the exploration and helping you understand what's best for you. So we show you different options. Next. I don't have to spend too much time on this, but what this does, these sheets, and we encourage all of you to look at these afterwards if you can download or go onto the site. We take each of the options. We're trying to put everything in one place. We're going to show you the option, but in this case, it's option 1, addition renovation. We show you the plan of it so that you remember, oh, that's the one that did this and looks like that. And then we show you each of the 8 or the 4, the pillars and our criteria: education spaces, district, site, sustainability, community. And those are the 4 colors on the left. And we're showing you what they all do well and what they all do not so well. So this is a value interpretation based on all of our criteria. If you want to look at one place to understand a building or an option, this is the place. For example, Remember I said that the educational spaces are not all right sized or ideally located because it's a renovation. And because the district goals of grade-based alignment are not really met. So remember, those are the kinds of things we talked about here. Next. Both option 1 and option 2 have the same enrollment of 390 students. This is an example of an all new building, option 2. So its educational spaces are much easier to arrange, to build, to really to make work, you know, in every way. And the district goal, but the district goal of grade-based alignment is still not met. I want to point out something really interesting here, and we're going to get into it when we share costs and look at some scenarios. Look at the bottom right under that picture. It says District Elementary School Plan. We may be doing one building here, one school, either the small Hadley, the 3 through 5 district, or the K through 4 district size, small, medium, and large. But each one of those will have its costs. But each one of them also, in terms of elementary schools in town and the plan for those, have different scenarios for completing the plan. For example, if I do this new Hadley under a long range plan, I will have a Hadley K through 4 new school that costs a certain amount of money. But in the future, you're going to have to look at Stanley K through 4 and a future Clark K through 4. We don't know, you know, we're looking at it as if it was an MSBA approach. You've actually submitted those 2 schools to the MSBA for their consideration. So remember that there's a plus, plus, plus here. When choosing option 1 or 2, the Hadley K through 4, you're actually choosing one of 3 schools, and in order to complete the plan, you'd want to add them all up. Next. Option 3, which is the 3 through 5 on Hadley. The educational spaces are right-sized. The district goals all of a sudden are really met because we have grade-based alignment. K through 2, still for a little while, is in the other schools, but now we have 3 through 5, and then you go to middle school and high school, and everybody's together. That's one of the big goals here. The site location is pretty good. Traffic we can work on. One of the things about anything on the Hadley site is that for development, we're going to have temporary classrooms, probably located at Stanley or the middle school or somewhere for about a year and a half in order to build this and come back to it. If we tried to phase the project and leave the existing building there, there'd be a lot of disruption, and it probably would cost more in the long run. It could have wonderful sustainability and energy costs because it's a brand new building with our high performance envelope and systems. And it has wonderful community spaces downtown where community spaces and character really matter. So here's something to look out for. Option 3 and then option 4, which we're going to look at on the middle school site, which are very similar. If you look down at the district elementary school plan, both of these, because they are a district 3 through 5 of 540 kids, they in the future would require, if you were going to fulfill a plan, they'd require a district K through 2 new school. Now you could argue it's both Stanley and Clark, or you can just kind of look at it and say that would complete the plan of grade-based alignment. And I know the town has been planning for this for a long time, so you can then see how that scenario works. This particular option that's down at the middle school, it's a very similar building, so it works pretty well, and we realized that there are a lot of traffic issues down by the middle school, and there's already a middle school on site, and that's a lot of kids. So although our traffic consultant believes that she can do all kinds of wonderful things to mitigate and to make it flow better, and we think that some people in the community will understand that the middle school has its issues. It's also that if you build there, you kind of have to find another place for tennis courts. And what about that little league field? And we have as one thing we know about Swampscott is there's very little land, usable land anywhere. And so it has its pros and cons here. Next. When we look at 7A and 7B, and this is 7A, we're talking about a district K through 4 with 900 students. But remember that we're breaking it down into a lower school and an upper school communities, both with their own entrance and their own scale and their own populations with shared middle. What you're going to find when you go through the numbers is that makes it a very efficient building because you're not building 2 or 3 gymnasiums, you're not building 2 or 3 cafetoriums, you're not building more kitchens, you're not building extra this or that. There's a lot of things that that make it, it might seem large to you, but the truth is there are a lot of things that might bring value. The educational spaces are all right size and broken down into small learning communities. This school, should you decide to use it, would take all of your elementary schools and solve them all at once. And in the future, you wouldn't have to pay any more for new places. So I think you'll see that in a couple minutes. Traffic, we have to be very careful about the recreating and helping all the traffic in and out, which the traffic consultant has done diagrams of, but getting lots of queuing space on site. And we feel like this is a wonderful community area. It's right in a suburban setting, but it's also buffered and very quiet and next to conservation land. So we feel like it could be very safe, appropriate, and a wonderful place. Next one is 7B, and really has all the same aspects, except because it's 2 stories, it's bigger. And again, it takes up more space on the site and less place for play and for exploration. That's how we looked at all of this. We showed you option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4, option 7A and 7B. Lots of information, but it's only the beginning because you do not have to choose tonight. You're just getting introduced to these concepts. Okay, next. So I want to thank you so much for listening. I know that was a lot, and I can't wait to answer your questions a little later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And I want to take a moment here to pause, and I've noticed that there's been a few questions brought in regard to design, and I want to take this opportunity to answer some of those before we get into the actual budget.
That sounds like a good idea.
That sounds great, Vivian. Why don't I recap what we've had so far?
Okay.
And probably be a great place right now to redisplay the slide explaining how people can present their questions. If you wouldn't mind doing that.
Not at all.
We'll go back to some of the earlier
One
ones that
second.
came in. So we'll start with a question from Steve. He asks, relevant to the conversation before about durability and lifespan of the buildings, what is the proposed lifespan of any of these buildings that we've been discussing? We know that in Swampscott we have a tendency to make buildings last 110 years, whether or not that's wise.
Well, this is a really interesting question. I think it all has to do with durability and there's kind of upfront costs. And if we manage the upfront cost better or well, the building will last longer and be a lot less expensive to operate energy-wise. There's a little formula there, you know, that we'll go through. I would say that the MSBA would say these are 50-year buildings. We would say that they're probably more like 75-year buildings, especially if we do a high-performance building, which we will be doing here with wonderful. So that's how they usually talk about it. And I try not to overestimate how long the building would last. A typical building like this, if you do the base materials really well and the windows and all of that, they can last for the life of the building. Most buildings need to have an upgrade to mechanical systems at some point 30 years or so down the line, and certain materials if they're not very durable.
I wish I had a crystal ball to tell me which systems will be in place 30 years from now, but
Well, you know, I want to reiterate to Steve and to people out there who may be conscious of this kind of stuff, that we know not only do buildings, I keep looking at buildings that were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they were built so poor. These are school buildings, and oftentimes they were built so poorly. The older buildings were more solid. And some of the newer buildings were the exterior envelopes, the insulation, the brickwork, how it was all put together was not done very well. And then it's only been the last 20 years that we've really gotten back into the idea of a building as a place that holds its own heat and all of that. And this building would be scheduled to be a very sustainable building, both financially, energy-wise, and durability-wise.
that's great, Lee. I particularly draw people's attention to the conversation, I think it was the previous forum, about sustainability and some of the technologies and designs being looked at to help us make this building last. Bob asks, should the Commonwealth propose specific guidelines around the current pandemic, or should, let's say, 10 students per class become the standard? How would this schematic of a building meet those requirements? Has there been any discussion with the SBA about moratoriums that they're placing on projects until we know where this pandemic takes the Commonwealth, and particularly the DESE and MSBA departments?
Vivian, you want to start on that?
A similar question had been brought up on previous presentations, and nothing new has been described or elaborated upon from the MSBA, other than currently the pandemic is of a serious nature, and all schools and districts are making every attempt to modify as well as meet the requirements. But since this building is still in feasibility and schematic, moving forward to schematic design, we don't anticipate addressing all of those concerns that are happening here at the moment and now to future projects until we learn a little bit more. As this project does progress and we move forward in the design development, if these pandemic concerns have become materialized into standards that we will adhere to, obviously we will definitely design accordingly. But at the moment, it's too early to say.
You know, it's interesting, Bob, because at LaValle Brenzinger Architects, we are really focused. This is real. This isn't like sales. We're really focused with a lot of our clients that are opening schools right now on how to make the design of the school work with the pandemic restrictions. And so some of the things that people are doing, as you know, and I'm sure Pam could even talk to this, but people are saying, well, let's have two, you know, for right now, let's have two, like a morning session, afternoon session. Let's figure out how to take the gymnasium and make it into a bunch of classrooms for now so we can spread the load. How do we do this scheduling wise? It's interesting because a lot of people don't, now, I also don't know the truth about the future, but a lot of people aren't thinking that this is going to change how we do all schools, but it's already changed a bunch of things. Like the nurse already wants to have a quarantine room and a way out the door without going through the rest of the school. And there's probably 50 examples of little things like that that we would probably evolve and adapt this building to do as we go forward, and hope that the MSBA can keep up.
I would just say, this is Mark.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say increased square footage is probably the most important part of the new building compared to the square footage limitations that we currently have at our elementary schools. In terms of spreading desks 6 feet apart, that's very difficult with our current
so if most of your classrooms right now are like 650 square feet, ours are 900 square feet at least, much larger. And part of the reason for that was so you could have breakout spaces and kids could be in different clusters, but it's a wonderful opportunity to spread kids out, and it probably will help you tremendously. Thank you, Martha.
So we neither have an indication from the MSBA that they have new guidelines envisioned yet, nor are they backing away from their existing funding schedule, given the situation. Is that correct?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Yeah, they are 100% behind this project and the other projects, fully funded still.
So it sounds like a two-edged sword. Vlad asks, can you elaborate on the traffic study, particularly the plan to turn Reddington or part of Reddington one way?
I certainly can, but we don't have, there was a whole traffic presentation done. So you can, who asked that question?
Vlad?
Rod, okay. So you can go back and see them. We had a community forum all about traffic and all of these criteria. The idea was, if somebody wants to jump to that floor plan of Hadley, any of them, I'll tell you what our traffic engineer suggested. This is a good one. She had wonderful, she kind of took Reddington, because right now it's a two-way. And the idea was to kind of loop around and have Rockland and those other streets kind of feed it, but have everyone come in a two-lane, one-way street down Reddington towards the ocean. And what that did was two things. One, it allowed in the morning and the afternoon, allowed if the queuing got off longer than the site, see we have this long queuing lane, if it got onto the street, it would go along the right side and people could still wait and park, while people could still, other cars can just drive right by and then get to Humphrey. And that was a simplified version of kind of what she was thinking. And she felt like there were other ways to find some parking, to make the intersection safer, to make it better for walking, because the Hadley site is a wonderful place for walkers. They all come in from their, from the east in a great way, and it's very close to a lot of families. I hope that helped. She thought it was a much better flow and would really decrease traffic. Now, I can't tell you that it's going to fix Humphrey, because Humphrey traffic is Humphrey traffic. And we would put a light there and try to help, but Humphrey is not so great in the morning, is it?
So I'm just going to ask Suzanne and Katie, I think, the traffic information is available on the building committee website?
The traffic information I will check right now, but I'll make sure it's there.
Okay, thank you. But
All
there's
presentations should be available, and that was I got to tell you, that was a really thorough presentation.
I'm gonna back you up on that, Lee. That was a phenomenally thorough analysis.
And wherever you end up building a school, the suggestions for any of the different areas, like say around the middle school, around Stanley, around here, could be used by the town to make everything better, regardless of where the school is.
Okay, I'd like to move on to a question that came in from the phones. So I don't know exactly who this is from, but it's an intriguing one. Photovoltaic, i.e. Solar energy, is expensive to put in place and critical to design. Any option with this in place? It's a huge cost. Is it feasible to implement? Where do you see this fitting in with the design and the schematics you've done so far?
Well, if I'm still answering, David, you may want to come in if I flub this up, okay? But it's a great question. First of all, our sustainability group and our sustainability meeting really nailed down that the town is a very green community who cares a lot about energy and the environment and want this building to be practical and sustainable. Any of these schemes every single one of these schemes, when we get to the money and the cost and stuff, are being designed right now with geothermal systems underground for heating and cooling, and highly efficient interior systems that connect to that. It also, we're taking advantage of light harvesting, which means getting light deeper into the building, and really highly efficient. Now, in terms of photovoltaics, depending on how big your roofs are, and as the building gets bigger, there's more roof. What we're saying is that we are going to design a building that can handle future photovoltaics, and this is the one thing. Photovoltaics are very efficient in our climate for creating electricity, but they're often bought through grants or for purchase agreements with other companies, even through the whole town. So what we do is we set it up so it's all ready to be plug and play, and then we will work with you to see what is the best way to incorporate that at a future date. But if you've looked at any of our sustainability projects, the idea was to create a building that is net zero ready. And that means that over time, you keep on adding renewable energy sources until you get to a place where it's as efficient as possible.
So I'm going to echo what I said about the traffic study and make sure that Katie and/or Suzanne has the excellent work done on sustainability and stratagems for getting the most out of the building, whether it be geothermal, photovoltaic, the light harvesting. It's really fascinating work. I have
Dave, Michael, if I may, on the photovoltaics, we still do have time in the project to decide if photovoltaics is the right option for this project. We are still at the very conceptual stage for the project, and as it develops, we'll definitely, I'm positive the photovoltaics will still come up and as an option, and we'll definitely do analysis as far as how much can be generated off of the roof based on the consumption for the building, and also whether it's appropriate for the town to own the PVs or maybe enter into a purchase agreement.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, it's a fabulous question. Thank you for raising it. And we will, I'm certain we're going to have multiple conversations, discussions, and meetings revolving around this same topic as we get further along in the process.
Time here to get to the additional discussion of hypothetical costs. I have questions that break down into a couple of different threads. One is very specific to the different sites. So I'm going to leave that for a moment. There is one more question that is more broad, and Neil Duffy asks, are there any existing buildings in your portfolio or otherwise that have similar layouts to the ones you're proposing that the audience might perhaps check out?
Are you saying existing, by existing, do you mean existing renovation?
I would think anything that represents the type of work you're presenting here, whether it be new construction or renovation.
Well, right now, I'll just say a wonderful example right now is that we're building a middle school for the Oyster River Middle School up in New Hampshire, Durham, New Hampshire. That's basically where UNH is. And what's great about that school is that the community was very, very behind two things. One, 21st century education, in a collaboration, and also energy and sustainability. So when we say a net zero ready school, that is a perfect example of it. It's being built right now. And Ketterer is actually the project manager on that, who's on our staff here. And it has a very high level of exterior envelope insulation, and that's really critical to a sustainable building. It's a 4-story building. and that really has very little surface to lose energy. It is a sustainable building where an educational building where you walk in and the first 2 levels have all of the kind of community stuff, and all of the kids are on the upper 2 levels in little neighborhood clusters that can be shared in different ways. Remember, middle school is team teaching, so it's perfect for that. And I think it's also going to be an extremely efficient and cost-effective building as well, even though it's masonry and durable materials. So I love the building.
That's a great example, but I also think that LaValle Grenzinger submission to the committee is available. Katie and Suzanne, I'm checking it again to make sure I'm right.
Oh,
We
our
have their
interview?
documents so that we can see all the information about the great work you've done.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Be happy to show you more.
Great. So I'm going to pivot briefly to the Hadley site. And Pat and Justina ask, you're showing a proposed parking lot on property owned by the Archdiocese, rented by the YMCA. What are the assumptions around whether the town will allow this space to use? There was also discussion about underground parking, which seems to make sense in a dense neighborhood like this. The Y, for example, has no off-street parking. And finally, what considerations are there for these 390 students for swing space being displaced, and when does this come into the conversation?
Well, I can start answering these. I think that Mike might be the better person to talk about the idea of the Archdiocese parking lot, but we have done we know that the town has been talking back and forth a little bit, and I won't go any further than that, but I know that we've done a little layout just to understand how much parking. I think it's about, David, 24 spaces, something like that.
It was around 25, Lee, 25 spaces.
Yeah, it's possible there, but we're not making any presumption. We're just basically saying that. So Mike, what do you think about that?
Clearly, in a town like Swampscott, space is at a premium, and we're looking at all possible options, including properties not currently owned by the town, for potential easements, arrangements, negotiations, to try and find ways to maximize the use of spaces that may not be being used during school hours. Nothing has been determined yet, but rest assured, I'm asking the voters and taxpayers to understand we are looking at everything.
Now I want to address my favorite topic of underground parking, because it's come up and it makes total sense. So we did some work on that on the side. We didn't include it in the budgets, but what we did was we did some diagrams and we sent them to our estimator, and we did due diligence because I knew that one of you or 5 of you are going to ask about underground parking at Hadley, and I wanted to know what that meant. So conceptually, the idea is that you would drive up and then you'd have to go down one of those ramps into the building, right? A whole level, because you don't want to give that valuable first level space, and you go down into underground parking. What we found was that it wasn't very efficient down there, much less than we had hoped, because the width of the building that we could do didn't allow us to have a certain number of lanes and banks of cars. So it's fairly inefficient. And the most that we were able to get out of that was 38 spaces, David. And now somebody could probably figure it out, and I doubt, of course, we just done one level, but you have to account for all the ramps up and down and all that kind of stuff too. And then when we talked to our estimator, she was pretty clear that it was a very small area for parking and that it would probably be fairly expensive to do. She gave us a number of a range of between $4 and $6 million for an underground parking structure under this particular project. that's the kind of thing that, you know, you ask for, like, what's it feel like? She said if you were doing a big parking lot, and it would be a lot cheaper. It would be like, you know, split and be efficient. But this is a very small area. So the question will be, as we move forward, and again, we'll keep it in our pocket because this is a very important place to find some parking. Can we invest that kind of money, which would not be reimbursed by the MSBA, by the way? That is not something that they would reimburse.
All right, Lee, I know we're getting close to time.
Okay.
Where we want to get to the numbers, which is, you know, an important
So anyway,
topic here.
it's
There are
a very few spaces for a lot of money right now.
There are a couple more questions I want you to get to.
Okay.
In particular, for the middle school site, the tennis court area, was that the only area that could be looked at there? I know there were some considerations. If you could briefly address that, then I have a question about Stanley.
Okay, just quickly, what we did was we didn't want to build up by the field and by the middle school for obvious reasons of scale and for middle school. We looked at the other big fields, but came to the conclusion they were very deep into the site, which meant you'd have to really even drive further and further. Right now, the access and utilities and stuff are already very far. It would start to become prohibitive, and those fields are very important to the town. I'm not saying that tennis courts are not. The tennis court area was flat, and it was the closest to all the parking and to the rest of it, and it was adjacent to the smaller field to the side of it. We looked at placing it in a place where there was enough room around it for some personal play fields and good access. Is there another place back there to put it? Not very many. We did look and walk through all of the different forests and all of that. Once you get beyond the line that's on the top of this drawing, which is owned by the town, those other fields up top, those are actually part of the golf course easement. They're giving you an easement to be up there, so we really couldn't build up there. So this seemed to be the best location if we were to try to build on this site.
That's great. Lee, Lara asks regarding the Stanley School site a couple of related questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, how does the height of the proposed larger building relate to the height of the current Stanley building? Secondary consideration is, how does that differ when you're standing at the bottom of the fields versus if you're considering it in general? Secondly, what is the relationship to the UU Church and the Forest Ave extension? And where is there any off-site parking considered?
Yeah, this is a work in progress, but I know that's why we showed a 2-story and a 3-story scheme. The first answer about scale and height. The existing Stanley is 2 stories. And while you stand there and it looks like the rest of the building is on a plinth, when we build a new building, what we're hoping to do is actually drop it a little bit on the field so it kind of mediates between the lower part and the upper part, so it doesn't really feel like it's as much of, you know, on a plinth. When we smooth out the whole site, there won't be a berm there. You kind of come up and the whole thing will feel like it's just a flowing area, but we understand that it's a little bit higher. A 3-story school is taller than the existing Stanley. As we move forward and show you the floor plans, but then also show you 3-dimensional studies, what we'll try to show is the idea, which we're building into the design, of a stepping building. So it might have a 1-story side on one place and step up to the 2 other stories, or it might be a 2-story and step. That is to try to limit the footprint. When we limit the footprint, we actually pull away from the existing sides of the site and their residential areas, so that it's farther away rather than another building that might push closer. So it's a very kind of finicky thing that I think that we want to explore together with you to understand what is the best one. So I can describe the relationship, But the best way we can talk about those is going to be to look at examples of them, and we will do that, promise.
Got it. And then
Okay.
off-site parking.
Well, right now we're able to fit, just in this diagram, we're able to fit a solid 80 parking spaces that are along the side. But we like that because it didn't create one big parking lot. We don't like big parking lots. There are options for off-street parking around, but I can't really speak to them specifically because I don't have a specific answer for you. At almost all of these sites, parking is going to be an issue. We have focused on outer traffic, and we've focused on drop-offs and queuing and getting people off site. Any of these sites could use some more parking spaces, but 80 is pretty good for this site so far. And I'm sure we could get a few more on there if we really look at it.
Thank you, I appreciate it. That gives us a look at all of the questions about site and floor plans and et cetera. I appreciate everyone taking a little longer than expected to understand, the different considerations that we've had, the complexities and the mutual limitations across sites and across different options on the sites. I'm going to hand it back to you, Vivian.
Thank you, Mike. And absolutely, there's a lot to consider and a lot to evaluate and a great deal of information to digest. So I hope that I'm going to try to simplify this as best as possible. I know we're talking about budgets and financials, and a lot of times those can be very complex. And I'm hoping that if I kind of walk you through it step by step, you yourself will be able to notice what the plan is for the current project, as well as what the cost implications are for the future, and as we look at the district-wide. So if David, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. First and foremost, I want to give a little bit of a background, just very brief, on what makes up the project budget. There's definitely the cost of construction that is usually known, but there's another factor known as soft costs. Soft costs are typically at this stage 20 to 30% of construction costs. And what makes up soft costs are, a lot of them include owner and construction contingencies, as well as some of the items that we looked through today. We described the various options and the site developments to each of these options in order for them to become feasible. Many of them have landscaping, site conditions, modular classrooms that need to be considered as it becomes a phased construction. Others will just need to consider the area that they're going to be constructed in and the environmental issues with the soil conditions. All of those are anticipated and comprised in the soft costs. The construction costs also include escalation. Typically, at this stage, we carry a 5% per year of escalation, as well as making sure that these are public bids and they follow the Massachusetts procurement laws and prevailing wages. Also, something to note is that there is an MSBA reimbursement. It is not yet determined what the eligible costs and percentage of that reimbursement will be by the MSBA, but they are significant. As we move forward and look at the actual cost, I want to take a moment to describe first and foremost what you are looking at. We categorize them into 3 groupings. The first grouping being the Hadley K through 4, the option of 390 students, whether that is at the Hadley site as an add renovation or at the Hadley site as a new school. Both of these, we examined the conceptual construction costs, provided the drawings that you saw very early on, and a project description to the cost estimator, where they came back with a cost for that construction. To that, we added the conceptual soft cost, which, as I said, at this stage is a range of 20 to 30%. And it gives you the total conceptual project cost, which is the first blue line that you notice. We did this for each of the options. In the second column, you have the district-wide 3 to 540 students, regardless if it's at the Hadley site or at the middle school site. We examined the design and reviewed it for cost, added to it a soft cost component of 20 to 30%, getting a total for what we anticipate the project costs to be. We did this as well for the district-wide K through 4, 900 students, both of which are at the Stanley site, but there are some peculiarities between the two, even though both of which will be roughly about 155,000 square feet. One is 2-story and one is 3-story. So looking at that and examining what the differences of construction would be for those, as well as adding the soft cost and what the overall project cost will be. As we have illustrated, the story doesn't end there. This is just the beginning. Let's look at all of these conceptual project costs. Initially, the addition renovation is roughly between 64 million to 75 million, given the construction and the soft costs. Looking at the second option of building a new elementary school on the Hadley site, there's a little bit less of costs, but still between 63 and 73 million. Delta of approximately 2 million. If we look at option 3 and 4, again, at the Hadley site as well as the middle school site, you'll notice that the project costs are very similar. This can be attributed because at the Hadley site, where there might be a need for additional soft costs, might be a little bit higher due to modular classrooms being needed, and it might be a phased construction. But the middle school site offers other options and a little bit more different costs, where now you have to create new roadways and have to consider traffic and the site. Eventually, they both kind of even out, and the project costs are coming in roughly the same. If we look at the district-wide K through 4, 900 students, at this time, both of which are being proposed for the Stanley site. This is, at first glance, a larger number than all of the other projects, 97 to 114 million dollars. But this is where I said this is only part of the story. Looking at option 1 and 2, as we described earlier, if we take the option of renovating and adding to the existing Hadley, or even tearing it down and building a new on the exact Hadley site, you still need to address the issues at Stanley and Clark. As we examine all of these projects and all of these options through the lens of the educational goals, the traffic, as well as the sustainability and community feel that has been so vocalized as very important to this community, we have to, look at and examine the additional work that needs to be done in the district. With option 1 and 2, 2 new additional elementary schools, roughly about 50,000 gross square feet each, have to be built. Yes, both of those schools the district has placed into the MSBA grant program, but that is up to the discretion of the MSBA whether you are accepted into the program or not. Let's assume for now that you are. And all of these dollars that we're referencing are in today's dollars. There is no sense of escalation depending on when these projects will be done. This is a way for us to be able to describe what the actual cost will be and compare them apples to apples. So if we were to build an additional 50,000 gross square foot for the 2 additional schools for either option 1 or 2, your overall project cost for the district will be 148 million to about 166 million, plus or minus. And if you'll notice that the addition renovation costs a little bit more than a new construction. This is mainly because trying to make all of the services and the classrooms and the sizes that meet the MSBA standards that are not met currently in the existing Hadley will be a challenge. A new school option allows you to meet all of the standards and be able to design it that meets all of the educational requirements that the district has. Let's look at the middle column, the district-wide 3 to 5. This definitely does answer the question of equitable for students. All of the district-wide 3 to 5 students will be in one location, whether it be at the Hadley or at the middle school. They will be taken care of with the project cost between 71 million and 83. However, that still leaves the need for a district-wide K through 2. If we anticipate building another project, that would be roughly about 90,000 square feet, gross square feet, about the same size as the current proposed K through 5. You would have an additional 71 million to 83 million for that school, giving you a total district cost of 142 million to 166 million. If we look at spending the money up front for the district-wide K through 4 900 student school, yes, it definitely is a larger cost up front at the 97 to 114 million. However, there is no need for a new additional elementary school. So your plan moving forward for future cost is 0, bringing the total for the project cost for the district to be 97 million to 114. If you review that bottom line cost against all of the options, it brings it into perspective that yes, initially it might seem like the larger cost project, but down the line, for the future of the district, it is not necessarily the largest cost. It comes in as the best option feasible financially. These are not meant to scare anybody. They are not meant to actually kind of sway you in one decision or another. But we felt that if we give you just the project cost as it is based on the construction and the soft cost for all of these options, it is really doing you a disservice by not telling you the full story. This community is very savvy, very educated, and has asked a multitude of wonderful questions. So we felt that it would be in your best benefit to kind of take the design as well as the conceptual project budget a little bit further and identify some of the areas that would be in need going into the future. We do the renovation or build a new school for Hadley, you're definitely going to have to address the concerns for the Stanley and the Clark. Those are both still aging buildings of about roughly the same age of the Hadley and will definitely be needing of repair. Whether you do a district-wide 3 to 5, you still need to address some of the lower grades, the kindergartners through the 2nd grade. We anticipate that school, if you do a district-wide K through 2, you would still need roughly about the same square footage as a 3 to 5. That being because the kindergarten classrooms are slightly larger by MSBA and educational goals and planning. So that project in today's dollars would be roughly the same. But if you do go with the option for a district-wide K through 4, you have answered a lot of the questions and have made it equitable for all of the students in the district. Now, some notes that we do have to take in mind. All of these costs are for conceptual basis. That means that the drawings have not been fully developed. You saw a lot of the sketches and a lot of the project description thus far. And the cost estimators that we have used are very much skilled and versed in providing real costs for what they have seen and have done so for numerous projects within the Commonwealth. A lot of these costs also consider them to be in today's dollars, as I mentioned. The options do not take into consideration some of the project durations. So as I mentioned earlier, if we do a phased new building for Hadley, that will have incremental time as well as cost associated with it. So instead of the conceptual soft cost being from the 20% range, it could very well be at the 30% range. Whereas for option 3, that could still hold because the need for modular classrooms. So we felt that it was at this point to give a just more of a range category. I'll stop for a moment to see if there's any questions.
So I believe, well, I'm gonna ask Peter Spelios, Chair of the Select Board, whether he wants to weigh in first. I do have a few questions. A few less than on the questions around how tall buildings are and how much parking there is, but that's just to be expected. Peter, would you rather have the team answer the questions coming in, or do you have something to say just yet?
I'm happy to do either or both. I think I guess the one thing I want just to, and thank you, you folks shared this slide with me a little bit earlier so I could have a preview of this slide. And I think what I just want people to understand is that our capital plan has assumed, on an abundance of caution, a $100 million elementary school, which is such a big number, and we all, are going to have sticker shock on that. But it's a number that, with the help of the MSBA, we're able to look out and see what other communities, like communities, are building and what the range is. And so in our capital plan, we assume that I just want to make sure people remember that there is an MSBA reimbursement. The high school one, I think, was between 35 and 40%, if I recall correctly, when we did the high school a decade plus ago. We don't know what the reimbursement here is going to be, but the town has assumed, that, and frankly, we're not surprised by, the potentially large costs here. What we haven't done yet, just in the interest of full disclosure, is we haven't been able to anticipate how we're going to deal with elementary school number 2 and elementary school number 3 in the future, because the reality is, while they're future costs, those that attend those schools understand those buildings need attention now. While we are in the MSBA program for this current elementary school program, we don't know what the future holds for our ability and timing, and whether or not the MSBA will also be participating with us on these future elementary schools. So I'm happy to answer some questions about finances. The last thing I just want to leave you with is that the town over the last 3 years has accumulated almost $5 million of what's called excess tax levy, which really means the difference between the amount the town could tax and the amount the town actually taxed. And for Swampscott, having $5 million, or roughly $5 million of excess levy capacity, is the single biggest amount the town has ever had, and I think puts us on the top tier of communities in Massachusetts. And that's important for 2 reasons. Number one, it means that we've all been able to pay less taxes over the last 3 to 4 years, which is really important. But that was purposeful, to constrain the budget, constrain growth in our budget, but also because everybody knew that we were going to come to the day that we're going to ask taxpayers to support a really big bill for a school. And so we need to do everything we can. We're going to continue to do everything we can. By the time we actually spend the money on the school, I expect that that excess tax levy to be even bigger, which means that we further limited tax growth in our town in a way that hopefully makes the ability for the town to support financially any of these options that you put forward.
Great, thank you, Peter. I'm going to get some of the specifics of the questions, and some of them do have to do with what you've laid out in terms of the town's financial strategy approaching this. And some of them are more specific about the project costs and what goes into them and what doesn't go into them. So I'll start with a question from Ragnar. And the question is, can you explain why no additional elementary school will be needed in the Stanley scenario? And what is the time horizon that's being assumed for that?
So for the Stanley scenario, if we were to build on the Stanley site, we have 2 options that we outlined. One which was the 2-story building and one which was the 3-story building. both of which at the Stanley site. Fortunately, the Stanley site is large enough to be able to accommodate a school that can house 900 students. Those 900 students make up all of the students in the district between the grades of kindergarten through 4th grade. So with that, since all of the elementary school students would already be in a new district-wide school, there is no need to build another elementary school. And that is what this line, the district elementary school future plan, represents. This does not take into account any other future plans that the district might have for the middle school, for the administration building, or otherwise. This is primarily just looking at the elementary schools. The 3 elementary schools in the district are Hadley, Stanley, and Clark. And if you combine all 3 of those and you build a district-wide school for 900 students between the grades of kindergarten and 4th grade, you have in essence taken care of the entire district and no need for another elementary school.
So if I can get you to restate that, we have 900 elementary school students, given the population of the town as it is. The question is, which of these options accommodate them, and which of these options leave some part of that population lacking an educational environment meeting the requirements of the state? Is that a fair statement?
Yep.
And just to reiterate, these are current numbers.
Absolutely.
So if we were to do all these projects today, this would be the
Yes,
cost.
if we were to do all of these projects based on the financial stability of currently, these are today's dollars.
Right.
The longer you wait in some of the other projects, the more the cost will go up inevitably. We anticipate a little bit of a escalation in the construction costs and in the soft costs. We have absorbed them in the construction dollars. And we anticipate this project to move forward and to be built, planned out and built in about 2 years' time. We took that same escalation rate as well as escalation duration and applied them to all of the projects. So all of these projects are, if you were to move forward today, what would it cost you today? The longer you
So
wait.
I have a specific question from Bob. So that means if we started all these projects today, which we are not, this is the minimum cost. The need additional schools lines will only be higher than this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Because that need for additional schools line, which is, if there is a way to kind of show which one, the second blue line is based off of current dollars. The longer that waits, there will be additional escalation on top of that.
So those lines can only go up.
Yes.
Thank you. Another question from Lara. What are the costs of demolition associated with these projects, and which of those might be absorbed or at least defrayed through the MSBA reimbursement process?
So the MSBA would definitely pay for the demolition of the Hadley site. They only paid for one demolition per project. So if we were to, for instance, do the build the district-wide K through 4 at the Stanley site, we would have an option of demolishing the existing Stanley once the new building has been constructed, and leaving the Hadley alone. If we were to go with option 2, build on a new school on the Hadley site, or even option 3, new school at the Hadley site, the MSBA would pay for the demolition of the existing school in order to build the new.
And with specific reference to Hadley, there's a question from Chris regarding what happens to Hadley if we don't use options 1, 2, or 3. Would the town be able to sell, reuse to offset cost? That might be more of a question for Peter.
I'm sorry, Mike, you just broke up on my end. Can you just repeat it for me?
Chris asks, could we, what is the eventual use of Hadley in the event that we do not use options 1, 2, or 3? Clearly, option 4 needs one additional school, so it might go there. But in certainly option 7A or 7B, is that something that could be used? The revenue from Hadley, some sort of reuse being used to offset the cost of.
Yeah, so generally speaking, as a rule, whenever we sell a building, that money has to go back into capital. So certainly could go back in to help the cost of the school. As to the future of Hadley, though, I'm a strong proponent, and I'm just one voice, but I'm a strong proponent of figuring that out now. When I came onto the board, we were in year, I think, 9 of having multiple empty school buildings that the town had yet to figure out. And so I strongly support, figuring that out at the same time so people understand what the future is and are comfortable with what the future is for those buildings.
Great. I have a question.
One of the things about the Hadley site is that it's downtown and near the ocean and near all the commercial buildings, and certainly has a lot of value.
Lee is a professional in the space. I respect that opinion. It comports to what I sense of a downtown site, but what the town decides to use for will be up to the board, up to town meeting, etc. I have another question here that didn't come in with a name, so I apologize. It says, what about maintenance costs for the town once the project is completed? I know that we haven't talked about operating costs in general. There was a consistent dialogue that wasn't probably fully understood during the construction of the new high school about the operating costs of that building. I don't know if that's something that anyone on this team feels qualified to at least begin to address at this point.
Hey, Mike, it's Peter. Can I just say that we did, going back 18 months ago, actually even before, it was actually the prior school business manager and was part of that conversation. And he began a really candid conversation that I think has continued about the reality is this: a new school is more expensive in operating costs, right? And so for us to be able to just, to be forthcoming about that, it is more expensive because we have systems that we don't have now. I say it a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's honest to God truth is you can't plug in multiple things in some of the rooms in Hadley because there's not enough electrical service. So the reason, so we don't have the energy usage, if you will, in these buildings today, even though they're not that efficient. But the reality is a new school is going to cost more. And I've really been happy with the fact that the school administration has been approaching the town, acknowledging that and consciously saying we've got to work on a budget that when these buildings come online, we can absorb them without doing any harm to programming and to other things. And so I think it's really important as a community that we're just upfront and we just own the reality is that given our integrated buildings, these buildings are going to be more expensive, more energy efficient for sure, but more expensive.
I see Martha Seibert is still with us as a panelist. I don't know if she has any commentary on that. I know that's something that the administration will be looking at, but I want to offer the floor to the school administration, particularly in light of the current budget situation.
No, I think Peter Spelios addressed it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better. He's absolutely right. The systems that are in place now in these aged buildings are not efficient energy-wise. And newer buildings are going to cost more to maintain. The high school is a perfect example of that. So we do have to figure out how we're going to work that into our operating budgets going forward.
If I can add to that conversation, as we evaluate our building systems options, our consulting engineers will do what we call life cycle cost assessments. And they'll not only look at the initial costs for providing these systems, but the projected costs for operating and maintaining them. So we will be able to see how those options stack up against each other, looking again at those first costs and those long-term costs. So we'll have some manner of control, obviously, at that point when we evaluate and finally make a decision on which systems to implement.
Fair enough. I have another current economic question coming in from Don. Given the conditions of this pandemic, what are our expectations about construction costs, the bonding markets, et cetera? Do we have any deflators, inflators regarding the current economic conditions?
Currently, I do have a few other projects that have just started construction during the pandemic, and we were out to bid during the pandemic. Oddly enough, the cost came in lower than we anticipated. Granted, whatever savings we did have from the construction dollars, we quickly identified them and placed them into a contingency line item for future expenses that might come forward due to the COVID pandemic and what that might entail as far as schedule and delivery and actual cost for the work.
I have something, I just a more rule of thumb thing that might make sense, but I've been through, as an architect, I've been through probably 4 recessions. And I'm going to say what might sound obvious. The best timing is to start a building when there's lots of money around, like we just got we already funded through the MSBA and all of that. And then to, during recessions, what happens is, well, during a recession, contractors and builders, they need projects, and their prices usually go down, and you usually get more for your money than building during a boom. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but I've seen it bear out over and over and over, and so much of it has to do with timing.
Fair point. And I'm just going to caveat from my experience that we are still a few years away from getting those numbers in hand. It would be great if we were shovel ready at this point, but we'll have to deal with the timing as it goes. I have one final question, just checking. I've got stuff coming in from text, from email, from phone, from the Q&A. And this one asks the superintendent, which of these aligns most with the educational vision? Which of these provides what you are looking for from the people of Swampscott in terms of delivering your vision?
Is there a slide that we're going to answer this question?
No,
Yes,
this one's
actually,
on you,
there is.
There is a slide.
There is. Let's kind of get off of this slide, David, if you wouldn't mind, and progress up to the one right after this, bringing it all together.
So thank you.
I
wanted to first say that the community has asked us repeatedly at these public forums, what is the master plan for the school? The master plan for the schools will really be determined by whatever selection is made and whatever vote takes place and whatever configuration is voted for. That's going to determine the steps that the community needs to take in terms of moving forward with other projects, or if one of the district-wide K-4 schools is selected, then it will be done in one fell swoop. Lee, earlier in the presentation, was talking a lot about the district goals and our guiding principles that came out of the educational visioning sessions. And for those that are still on this call and that may not have heard this before, one of the projects that my team and I have to work on, and I was updating yesterday, as late as yesterday, was an educational plan. And it is a solid 50-page document that articulates what a new project would give to the district and do for our district. So when I look at those district goals, and David, you don't have to go back to them on this slide presentation because I have them up. The number one is the district grade alignment. And so whether it's the 3 to 5 or the K-4 district wide, that really hits that mark in terms of great alignment, pooling our resources, keeping programs, special education programs in the same school. Student placement, it solves that issue. Small school feel, with the design and the proposed concept that has been presented tonight of an upper and lower school, the way that this would feel, although it would be large, and that is the which option are we on? 7A and 7B. You know, when I think back to the former project, we talked a lot about, you know, what would be the administrative savings? There's not going to be administration savings in this because you're going to have neighborhood schools within a school. You're going to have an upper school, a lower school, and the community being concerned about the principal knowing their children's names would be mitigated by the amount of staffing we have there. So either the 3 through 5, district-wide 3 through 5, or the school, the 900 student school with everyone in one location really does hit on all of our district goals. The minimizing and sharing of staff would all be there. The class sizes in the primary grades, we've hit with several of these options, but we really, you know, that is our philosophy though. In recent times, we've had to do things differently. The other piece to this, in writing the educational plan, I bring that up because when I was adding to it yesterday, I looked at our guiding principles again. And for my team, the guiding principles, the two that stand out are equity and inclusivity. And again, the options for the 3 to 5 district-wide or the K to 4 district-wide really speak to those guiding principles. If that is what our vision is for our community and our district, those are the two options that solve that. Now, do they solve everything? They don't solve everything because you're still going to have inequity in terms of the K to 2 being in 2 other schools. But they do solve the programmatic problems in terms of being able to offer special education programs in 3 to 5, but we would also have to offer those same education programs, special education programs in K to 2. So if you're asking me what my number one is that solve both our district goals and speak to our guiding principles as educators, it is the district-wide K to 4. The other options don't meet our needs. If we did a K to 4 of 390 students, whether it was a reno or whether it was a new build, you're still going to have the issues of placing students in one school, and then if their particular needs change with specialized programming, they may have to transfer to a different school. That doesn't solve that. That doesn't feel good educationally. It doesn't feel good social emotionally when we're so concerned with our students. So educationally, and I'll throw it out to the other educators on here, Mrs. Raymond and Mrs. Porter-Roberts, that, you know, if we are firmly sticking with what our goals are and what we've put forth in this presentation that Ann spoke to earlier, and if we are fully looking at our guiding principles of equity and inclusivity being our top 2, then it really would be the district 3 to 5 or the district K to 4. And I will throw it to Mrs. Raymond or Mrs. Porter-Roberts, whoever would like to add anything that I may have missed.
I don't think you missed anything, Pam. It's Martha. I totally agree with you. Both having that district-wide consolidation, the full K to 4 obviously solves all the problems at once, but the 3 to 5 also is starting to chip away at that vision that you've, the district team and leadership team have created. So I feel like it would be a step in the process.
My concern as well with the K to 4 projects and the projects that need additional school, even with the district 3 to 5. This is our second go around on a potential new elementary school. What is it going to take to get that second school? Say we went with the district 3 to 5. How many years is it going to take for this community to have a vote for a new K to 2 school? And as Vivian said earlier, we have issues at Clark and Stanley, or at all 3 of our elementary schools. So, and Peter said it best as well, how are we going to continue to maintain those buildings while we look how many years down the road to build another school? The information, financial information you just presented is is a lot, and it's a number that is scary to people, but it's one and done. So that's the financial picture, but more importantly, educationally, it solves what we think is best for this community, and it solves and meets our district goals and our guiding principles. Katie, did you want to say anything?
As a teacher, I've had the extreme honor to work both at the middle school level and the elementary school level. And the difference between working at the middle school level, where you are with all of your cohorts at the same grade level and able to collaborate and talk about grade initiatives, versus being at the elementary school where you're in 3 separate buildings on 3 separate schedules and don't have the same planning times as the other grade level teachers, and how dispersed then it feels in terms of both the curricular content and special events. I can say that grade level collaboration is such a benefit. And one thing we have learned from COVID, a positive of it, is the amount of grade level collaboration that has been necessary in order to survive through it. And I think we owe it to those teachers to allow them to continue that environment and allow them to continue working with their colleagues and not be 3 separate islands.
So Michael, that was a great question. And it's something that I've given a lot of thought to. We've all given a lot of thought to, but most recently as yesterday, and looking at that educational plan and considering the options, it really became very clear.
Well, I thank you for that. The only thing I can add to that is an answer to your question. By the time this would potentially come to a vote with the town, it will have been 20 years since the last time we asked the town. And prior to that, it was nearly 30 years since the town undertook any kind of school construction, retrofitting the old junior high school into a makeshift high school in 1975. I know that because that's where I graduated from. So I have one last request that's come in from the questions that I think would actually be helpful for all of us. Vivian, could you bring back up where we are in the process?
Sure.
We've gone through a lot of different information here. Just to remind ourselves where we are and when we'll know more than we know today.
David, I apologize, but I'm going to ask you to go back at the very early slide.
Among other things, particularly with reference to the current pandemic engendered economic crisis / opportunity. We know those are multivalent words that are available to us now. When will we know how this will affect us and the numbers will get more specific?
That's a lot to answer all in one, but I'm going to try to do my very best.
I know you can.
Yeah. Well, as we are today, we have reviewed many of the options. We've gone back previously, looked at the sustainability question, traffic questions, as well as reviewing the site. And today we gave a preliminary design option and tried to kind of formulate all of the information that we have been working on and gathering thus far into something coherent. So in July, which is really right around the corner, we'll be making our actual submission to the MSBA that gives the preliminary design program, a lot of which was already presented today. A lot of the same information, what we have been developing, we have been sharing with not only the school building committee, as well as this community, and we'll be putting it in a formalized version to the MSBA. With that, we'll work towards a preferred schematic design, meaning that we have to start narrowing down the options and looking at least 1 or 2 viable and feasible options to develop further and have actual renderings, develop the design a little bit more, and understand what the costs and implications are. That is set to be delivered to the MSBA in October timeframe, where they review. In April, we'll go up against the schematic design submission, if you see on the calendar. Once we have done the preferred schematic, we'll develop it further, present it to the MSBA in April, where they will also have a board vote where many of our school building committee representatives will be present, especially the educators among them, to defend and to discuss with the MSBA what the options are and which option is selected. Come September timeframe is when the community votes, and we need everyone to vote and hopefully achieve a approval to move forward. Now, as far as timing goes, this takes you just into September. We have many meetings coming up. We have many other decisions that need to be made, as well as a great deal of input from the community. David, again, I'm going to ask you to jump around. I apologize. Our next slide was going down to the community and giving you a highlight of what meetings are coming and what is the next steps. Next week is our school building committee, where we will do a project overview. That similar information will be presented to the community on June 30th. Once again in August, we'll come back, August and September. Those will design reviews of review of 1 and 2 to kind of start finalizing and putting together the package that we will be submitting to the MSBA. Prior to the submission, we'll review it in September as well in a community forum, the preferred design option. What I'm hoping that schools will resume in September. Granted, they might look a little bit differently, but as far as the MSBA concerned, this project is still moving forward. We have tried very much as not only a school building community and a committee, as well as the architectural and the project management team to keep moving forward. We already understand that there are so many concerns and so many issues beyond our control at the moment in our community that we are all affected by. But our job and our goal is to keep moving forward. And with that, we are trying our very best to keep moving this project forward. We want to make sure that this district gets its opportunity for a new school in the best way possible.
Vivian, I'd like to add just that in September, that's when consensus needs to be reached on picking one of those 6 options that was presented tonight in order to move that forward into schematic design. So it's between now and September to study all the permutations of the 6 options that that there might be that were shown, and then to pick one of them in September. That's the one that's preferred, and the MSBA votes to agree on that after it's submitted.
Great, and maybe Paul and Vivian, you can close caption. What is the level of granularity, of specificity that design will encompass compared to what we saw this evening?
It will be more detailed, but not a lot more detail. It'll be enough detail to dig into what other aspects about any of those designs might add more cost to it or take cost off. You know, any other great ideas that anybody from the community or the design team has that might be able to enhance the designs that were presented. And it'll, you know, it's just further development of what you've seen tonight.
And with that, that is one of the main reasons why when it comes to looking at the cost, we definitely give a range. There's room for development, there's room for growth, and there are so many things that we've already anticipated, but there are so many more that we have not thought of yet. You know, at the onset of 2020, who knew that we would be hosting all of these meetings virtually? But the time and the situation has brought forth this condition. So we try to anticipate as much as possible, hence the reason why we gave more or less a range of not only for the construction cost, for the soft cost as well, in anticipation of all of those yet to come and developing the drawings, the details, and what costs might actually come in.
Fair enough. So as your moderator of the Q&A, I want to thank everyone who's answered questions. I think it's been helpful for the audience, for the committee, for the attendees, and hopefully for those who view this in recorded form going forward. And I look forward to the next step in this process. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.